So I've got this chart up on the screen by Luis Vega, Luis Vega. Well, you can barely see it in the corner there. I don't know if you can see any of this text at all. It's a huge chart, and I can blow it up some to look at it, but pretty interesting, very nicely done. I'm not saying I agree with anybody's chart 100%, of course, but it's got a couple of neat features in it, which, like I said, may or may not be accurate, but they're interesting. And we know I've mentioned before about there's 7 groups of 7 in Revelation, but this has 4 of them, or 4 of them primarily listed. The 7 churches, of course, and then the 3 groups of 7 judgments. But there's also the intermission, they call it here, if I can get my mouse over there, that happens in these chapters, and just a kind of an interesting overview. I should have kept a link. I don't know if I still have that in my browser. I don't think I do. But if you do a search, and I guess I'll just type into search what I looked for, which is, well, like I said, Luis Vega, prophecy charts, Book of Revelation, and you can probably find it. Anyway, he has a lot of charts. This guy, if you look him up, has an awful lot of charts on a lot of things. And like I said, I don't always agree with it, and I'm sure I would find things to disagree with him about, but put a lot of work into these charts. So, and I think you can buy them and download them, the high-res, nice big print of it or whatever. But the PDF is pretty decent, and that's what I did, and that's a free download. And so what I thought I'd do is just look at the features that are, I think, unique about it. One, like I said, is we have these nice 7 blocks here, and they divide it. It's a good overview because they have a prelude or prologue, or however you want to put that. And I'll zoom in on parts of this, but then they have the letters to the 7 churches, then, and an adjudication, I think is the word they've got there. Is I'll have to blow that up for myself. I can't read the text barely on my own screen. And then the seals and the trumpets, and then an intermission, and then the 7 bowls, and then a finale, which is a good, I think, sequential overview of the book. But it isn't just sequential, because they also, you can see here, these kind of a what is that called? The divine ratio. No, I can't think of the term right now. Anyway, you guys can help me out in chat. I know there's an easy word I'm looking for here, of this proportion. His name is just escaping me. He's got 2 of them that seem to center. I forget what I looked briefly. I don't remember what criteria he gave for looking at these things, but you can see he drew these 2, whatever the name is that I can't think of. One centers here in about chapter 5, where the seals are, and another on, I think, chapter 9 of the trumpets. That seems to Fibonacci. Thank you. I just could not think of that for the life of me. But it's an interesting look at things, and he's trying to draw emphasis because, as anyone who's studied prophecy would tell you, that it's more of a 3D chess kind of a thing. It is not something you can just take as always sequential, or just always as allegory, or just always as symbolism, or 1,000 different ways people take it. I think it's going to be a both and on a lot of things, but there is a clear sequence of the churches, the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, and each of them has a sequence within them. Now, these things are seen in a sequence, but they also can look back, which I think is the idea of these Fibonacci patterns here. And so I just think it's a really interesting chart. Like I said, you can look, I gave you some search terms there. You can look that up. Let me try to, if I can, zoom in on that. Let me see if I can control this right. Yeah, there's the links if you want them. Luis Vega, and also other resources that he has. But let's just take a look at some of these details he has. And he has some things that are just kind of notes. They're not part of Revelation necessarily, but kind of derived from it. And like the 144,000, you'll see people talking about that all the time. And of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses have one idea of it, and a lot of other people think they're this, they're that. What the Bible gives us, that there are 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. Some speculate that these were the children killed by Herod when he was trying to kill baby Jesus within 2 years, 2 years and younger. So we know it had been no more than 2 years since Jesus had been born that Herod did that. And they speculate that these are those children, but I really think that's a stretch. I can't rule it out, but I think it's like probably 95% not those children. And the list of tribes is different than they would have been in the first century anyway. And they are, we can see we have a note there that on here that instead of the tribe of Joseph replaced the tribe of Judas, or Judas was replaced by Matthias, and among the apostles. But up here was the note for that one, Dan is replaced by Joseph. So the tribe of Dan is not there. Some people say from that Dan must be the tribe of the Antichrist that he will come from. Speculation is all I can tell you. But this list of tribes is not the normal list. It's mostly, but there's this, Joseph and Benjamin, down here. These were the two sons of, I think it was Rachel, of the two wives of Jacob, I think. And I'm getting really bad with my names these days. But anyway, that's who the 144,000 are. There's 12,000 from each tribe. Yes, there is a genetic component to Israel that still remains to this day. And this is one of the many reasons I don't subscribe to any kind of replacement theology. I believe there are separate tracks for Israel as a nation and the church and the Gentiles. There are 3 different kinds of people in the Bible. And Paul even says Jews, Gentiles, and the church of God, and that we're a new creation. So we can't mix those things or we'll get prophecy all wrong. So that's just all about that note there. And then there are 12 apostles. So he's not only doing the 7s here in this chart, he's doing the 12s. And we also note that just as there was a replacement of the tribe of Dan by a tribe called Joseph, there's also that Judas, the betrayer, was replaced by Matthias. We know that from Acts 1. And so we have these 12s, and as you would know if you read Revelation, at the end of Revelation, where it describes the New Jerusalem, the 12 gates, this is where they get the idea of the pearly gates. There's not one set of gates that people go through to get to heaven. That's a complete misunderstanding. The only gates mentioned in heaven are of the city of New Jerusalem, which is 1,400 miles or thereabouts square at its base, at least. Nobody knows if it's a cube or a pyramid, but we know that it's a 1,400 miles length, width, and height. So at each of the 4 walls at the base are 3 gates. 3 times 4 is 12. And each of those gates is made of 1 pearl. That's where you get pearly gates. And each gate is named after a tribe of Israel. And it will be these 12 tribes we see mentioned here of these 144,000. And the apostles will have their names on the 12 foundations of the New Jerusalem. So there we have 2 sets of 12, and there are 24 elders in Revelation. So I don't think we can dismiss the fact that at the beginning and ending of Revelation, we have these 2 groups of 12. And this is why, again, I take the 12 apostles of Jesus as mapping the 12 tribes of Israel as a connection between the 2, but not a replacement for either. That in the end, yes, we have all one kingdom, but there are different groups of people in the kingdom, and the fact that these 2 groups of 12 are divided into 2 groups of 12 instead of blended all together is backing up what I'm saying here about them still being distinct. You don't replace the church with Israel, and you don't replace Israel with the church. So those are those 2 groups of 12, and then he goes into the prelude here, which is the first chapter. The 7 churches are in the 2nd and 3rd chapters. And he breaks this down into 4 sets of 4, which is revealing Jesus to John when he was first given the revelation, and Jesus' authority, attributes, and admonitions. And then there's praise and description, and Jesus is described as faithful witness, firstborn from the dead, ruler of all the kings. And then his transcendence of time, who was, who is to come, the Alpha and Omega, that is to say, the first and the last. And Jesus describes himself that way, and also God on the throne describes himself that way. They are being equated, but not homogenized, if I can explain it that way, because then you get into the Trinitarian argument, and I have documents on that. And then the last set there, he has what Jesus did, loved us, freed us from sin, made us a royal priesthood, and purpose is to serve. So that's the prelude that they map out here. I'm going to go up to the top part of the chart. It's also interesting, he has a list of 7 raptures in the Bible, okay? And the church would be the first one, chapter 4 of Revelation, verse 1, and then we have the martyrs of 7-9. You can always go to Revelation and look at these. The 2 witnesses in chapter 11, the man-child who was snatched up to heaven in chapter 12, then 144,000 in chapter 14, and the harvest of chapter 14 also. So it's a really good chart for just kind of wrapping your mind around all of this. I won't go into all the details. It's just kind of a quick overview because I've done the whole prophecy series on this. But notice here, he says a rapture is defined as a translation from the mortal state to the immortal state and acquiring a glorified body. That's what constitutes a rapture. I've heard unbelievers try to, or especially astrotheologists, atheists, anybody, Luciferians, try to redefine rapture to something else, anything else but what the Bible gives us. But the Bible gives us this definition, is moving from mortal to immortal in the flesh, and not a spiritualized thing. That's not what a rapture is. That can be used figuratively in secular terms as being enraptured. That is to say, caught up. That's what, it's the Latin word to be caught up, and it's the Vulgate of Jerome translated that from the Greek word harpazo, which is to snatch. And so that's what a rapture is. It's a snatching in the literal sense in Bible prophecy of the physical into the spiritual body, as far as it's still a body. Okay, it's mortal to immortal, and Paul made that clear in one of his writings. But you can't just make up meanings for what a rapture is, and outsiders can't tell us that, no, they know better what a rapture is. We're letting the Bible tell us what a rapture is, and that's what it gives us. And this happened as far as when Jesus left the earth was, they have 32 AD, thereabouts. You can play with that date for a couple of years either way, but they have it as 32 AD. I can't argue with that. And that's the things that was. See that here right at the top, what was, because that's what Jesus is telling John he's going to talk about. What was, what is, and what it is to come. So what was is the past, and the past is what Jesus did up to the time he left. Okay, that's what John has seen, what he has seen. And then what is right now is the age of grace. Okay, they got here, or you can call it the Pentecostal age, the mystery age, the bride of Christ. Depends on which gospel writer, or not gospel writer, but which New Testament writer uses which terms. Those are not terms for different things. They're just terms that they chose to describe it. And there's reasons that the Holy Spirit would inspire them to describe it in different terms, because it's a three-dimensional thing being described. It's like the old illustration of 3 blind men trying to describe an elephant that they'd never seen this animal before, and one is at the trunk end, one is in the middle, and one is at the back end. And so the one at the front is going, making, this is like a tree, and then one in the middle is like, I forget what he described that as, the main body. And then the one at the end says, no, it's like a snake. They would all come with different opinions of what an elephant is just by where they were looking. But if all 3 of them put their findings together, they would have a better 3-dimensional view of what this animal was. In the same way, the writers of the New Testament were given different terminology for different reasons, but we have to know by description what they're talking about. And so this age that we're in, and he speculates on years, I just discount that completely. The 32 we can work with, but whether we're in a certain Hebrew year, I don't care. The thing is that I get from this chart is laying it out, mapping it out, so it's easier to wrap your mind around, and that we are currently here. You are here. We're here. We're at this red triangle as far as I'm concerned any day. But what it is in Revelation is, and there's different ways you can take this, and I don't see any one way as having absolute superiority. What we can say for sure is that these churches all existed at the same time in the first century, and they were all in one location in what is now southern Turkey. John was exiled on the Isle of Patmos in the Mediterranean, and he could see all that coastline from where he was. Because if you think about it, if it was meant for all churches and all ages and a sequence through ages, first of all, they were all there at the same time. And second of all, some of the major churches like Jerusalem, for example, were conspicuous by their absence. So there's something else being messaged here, and not just the problems these churches were having. I think the most sensible interpretation, or the primary, if not the only, but the primary interpretation or message that Jesus is giving with these 7 letters, is that they are exhibiting problems that any given church can have, and different aspects of what the remedy is that Jesus is recommending, or things that people can expect. And we have to face the fact also, as I've done before in other videos, that not everything that Jesus talks about that these churches would go through happened in the first century. So it is more than what meets the eye, but what that is a matter of speculation. And I think it's just describing the church age as a whole, whether it's a sequence or not, because like I said, all these churches existed at the same time in the first century. But they had certain conditions, and you can roughly lay that out in church history, but I've seen a lot of force fitting, which I don't agree with. But anyway, whatever you want to take that is, I think everyone could agree, if you take the literal approach to the Bible, as I do, that this is a description of the church age because of its place in Revelation, if nothing else. And we also have 7s in there. We have 7 stars, 7 lampstands, 7 churches. They all describe the same thing. And they are churches. They're not individual Christians. This is not a different way of enduring for salvation. This is churches as groups. And there are individual exceptions in these groups. That's how we know they're not about individual salvation, because otherwise Jesus would not say, but there are some among you who have not done the bad thing, whatever it was. So these are to churches. So the stars, lampstands, and churches all mean the same thing. And they're not talking about a different kind of salvation. It's talking about churches that stand or fall based on what they do with Jesus' warning. And there are 2 churches in the list who had no warning at all. One was Smyrna, the persecuted church, and the other was Philadelphia, the little strength, but they will be taken out of, if you read there in chapter 3, I think it is, the Church of Philadelphia was promised that because they held fast to the truth and did not compromise it, that they would be taken out of the time and place of the coming wrath of God. This is the time is, the hour of trial there, and taken out of the world. And I've gone into those details before, but doing the overview, kind of, sticking to that here and not chasing all the rabbit trails, but there's the 7 churches. And let's scroll up here. That's chapters. Actually, it's chapters 2. These are the chapter lists here. Here's chapter 1, the yellow. Then 2, 3, and 2 and 3 are the churches. Okay, so these numbers are before the group that they're about. So 2, and then 3 starts. Churches 5, 6, and 7. So. And no, I don't agree with this 1984 year. I don't know. I'm not concerned about calculations. Those lead people astray. And they defy calculation. I think that's by design. So anyway, we have the church age. And at that time, this Greek word here is parousia, or parousia. I shouldn't use the English pronunciation. It's tempting to do with when there's an S before an I. But that's a sigma, small sigma there. Anyway, parousia means coming or an official visit. That's what a parousia is. And this is also the judgment seat of Christ. And these things are put together from other descriptions of the same period of time. That's not, cherry picking, because you're talking about the same topic in those other locations. So here we have the rapture, and that word there that they have sideways here, come up here. These are the exact quote of Jesus, or a voice from heaven calling John after he's seen the 7 churches letters, and he took down the dictation for those. He was snatched up. he said, just like in the first chapter, when he heard the voice like a trumpet, he hears another voice like a trumpet that says, come up here. And there's an open door, which also ties back to the Church of Philadelphia that had an open door before it and was promised to be snatched out. So we have the come up here. It's an official visit that Jesus does not come to the earth, but in the air, and brings us up to meet him, which again matches the bridal custom, betrothal and all that I've gone into before. But that's chapter 4 and 5. About first, it starts with the come up here, and John is transported, raptured to heaven. And as you can see here, he mentions in this chart the trumpet call and the open door. And then what John sees is the throne of God, very much reminiscent of Ezekiel's vision with the wheels within wheels and so forth. There's an emerald rainbow, lightning and thunder, 7 lamps, 7 spirits. We've already mentioned those, and a sea of glass, or it looks like glass. And when somebody says it looked like glass, they're describing a real thing in terms they could use, so you can't allegorize the glass. John is already using it to describe something. And then that's where we see our 24s. We have thrones, elders, and crowns. These 24, we saw that just a bit ago, of these two groups of 12. And they are combined in this scene where there are 24 thrones with 24 elders and 24 crowns. In other words, each elder sat on a throne and wore a crown. And these are the ones who put their crowns at Jesus' feet. Doesn't say all Christians will do this, but it says that these 24, whoever they represent, that's according to your interpretation, but they are the ones who put their crowns at his feet. And there are 4 living creatures, the lion, ox, man, and eagle. This again is an Old Testament reference of the tribes, the way the tribes of Israel would camp in their wanderings in the wilderness around the tabernacle. And so these were the 4 inner tribes, I guess you could say. Whoops, I don't know what it did there. It seems to be doing strange things to me while I'm zoomed in here. But anyway, we have all these things that John sees when he's called up there. So the 24 elders are already there when John arrives. There's a lot of things that are already there. Okay. And the main point of that scene is the Lion of Judah. But when John turns to look at him, he's a lamb. Okay, so he's called both the lion and the lamb. Then this is where I think a lot of people get that confusion that they call Mandela effect, which I've done a video on. But the lion and the lamb are seen here in Revelation. This is not going back to the Old Testament. The lion will lay down from the lamb, because there's another reference that says the wolf will lay down with the lamb. And that's where the confusion comes from. But it also comes from here because Jesus is both the lion and the lamb. And this is why Jesus can open the scrolls, because he is both of those. He is going to unseal what I believe the seals are, as the document that's the title deed to earth that Jesus has bought back. So that's why he's the lion and the lamb. I wish it would stop doing it. I don't know why it's doing that. But anyway, that's chapter 4 and 5. And it began with John coming up here, and this is after the church age. And yes, we can take it this way. There's no reason to dismiss it. I'm not saying it's the only way. Like I said, nobody has the whole picture, and that's by design. But this is the way I see it, and I have to report what I see. And then we get into the judgments, because the Lamb has been identified as the only one who could open the scroll and unseal it, and they have, I'm going to zoom out here, I think, to this illustration up here in the corner. I hope you can see that. That's how they envision 7 seals in a row on the scroll. But from what I've read, I don't think it's that way. I think it's that the practice was that you wrote a part of a legal document and put a seal on that rolled up part of a long strip of things that you were going to add to later. You would seal the first part, the first item in the contract or something like that. You would seal that shut, and then you would write some more and roll up the scroll some more and seal that shut. That is more of a sequence, and I think more matches the reality in the first century that John would have understood, and that was probably meant than what he saw was a 7 seal scroll. So I don't agree with this illustration here on just 7 cords wrapped around the document so it could finally be unrolled. I think it's being unrolled a little bit every time a seal is opened. So let me try to zoom back in again. And we're beginning to see the 7 seals, and notice they don't open until after the church age, after John is called up here and he sees the 24 elders. Then he sees the Lamb who is worthy to open the scroll. And this instigates, in my opinion, the wrath of God, because the Lamb is God. And so, by definition, since nothing happens on earth until the Lamb opens the seal, it is the wrath of God, and God will not pour out his wrath on the Lamb. How could that happen? And this is also why I don't believe the white horse is Jesus. Just because somebody with a crown is riding a white horse doesn't make him Jesus. It's the wrong kind of crown, the wrong kind of weapon, and the Lamb is Jesus calling for, telling the creatures to call forth these horses anyway. So I totally reject the idea that the white horse is Jesus. So as they have here, as Luis Vega has here, the white horse is a false Antichrist piece. And I believe this will happen right after the rapture. The rapture will be such an upheaval that this will be Satan's cue to put the New World Order in high gear. I believe everybody is saying that things seem to be in a holding pattern, that they're being held back and they don't know why. Well, this is why, because the church is still here, because we haven't finished our work and we need to get busy. Anyway, the white horse is the false peace that ensues. They'll say fake alien invasion, whatever, blue beam, false rapture. They'll say, oh, it's the bad people taken, don't fall for that, blah, blah, blah. I've heard all the theories. But I believe that the real rapture, which will involve all true Christians who had died being taken out of their graves and given immortal bodies. That's how Paul describes it. And then we who are alive, that's the thing that happens in the twinkling of an eye. We are changed to immortal, and then all of us in our immortal bodies are taken up to heaven. That's what the rapture is. It's nothing more, nothing less. And so we're already there. And because we're gone, they have to have a cover story. They've been prepping UFO, alien, blue beam cover stories for a long time, and they're just waiting until permission is granted for them to kick it into high gear, which, as I said, as long as we're here, they can't do that. And then this false peace is followed by world wars. And Paul described this very briefly, and he wrote at least 20 years before the revelation was given. He said that when they say peace and security, sudden destruction comes upon them and they will not escape. So that's first people are promised peace. It's the new age. We finally did it. We got rid of the powers that be. It's a big false flag because they are going to then usher in something far worse. And at first everyone would be happy. We got rid of those Christians, those Bible thumpers, and now we're going to have peace. But no, it's going to be followed very closely by war. Nobody knows exactly the years here. And then the inevitable result of war, and we already know the economy is a house of cards. There will be famine and pestilence and economic collapse with the black horse. That's what that's all about. And then green horse is the natural result that a lot of people will die. And the seals, the portion is 1/4, whereas for the trumpets, it's 1/3. Then we also see martyrs, and these would be godly people. I don't believe they're the church because the church is gone, but they are saints nonetheless. There have been saints before the church and there will be saints after. And they are never called the church after chapter 4 or chapter 3, starting with chapter 4. You won't see the word ecclesia anywhere in Revelation in Greek, which means it's rendered church, unfortunately. But you will see this mass martyrdom of people. It says under, it's translated under, but I believe the meaning is probably at the base of, like a poured out offering. That's what the offerings symbolize, the spilled blood of the martyrs. And they are crying for vengeance, which is an interesting thing. They say to God, how long until you avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth, or earth dwellers, or earthlings, you could say. That doesn't mean these are space aliens. It just means they're called earth people. Okay, the people who rejected the truth and would not accept the gospel. So anyway, there's a mass martyrdom and then a giant earthquake. And I will show you later my document that matches up the seals, trumpets, and bowls with Matthew 24, because that is not about the church. It's about the tribulation. And we will see that these disasters happen at the beginning and the end of that final 7 years. And it's 7 years because of what Daniel told us in chapter 9. But just because you see these signs at the 6th seal doesn't mean it's the end of the 70th week of Daniel. It happens in both places, and there are other earthquakes throughout Revelation. Anyway, this 6th seal is when the elites seek underground shelter. This is what they've been preparing their underground bases for. It isn't nuclear holocaust they're afraid of. They're the ones who instigate such things. It's the wrath of God. And they even say there, hide us. They tell to the rocks and mountains, hide us from the face of the one on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who can escape it? So everybody knows that this is the wrath of God, and it's during the sealed judgments. And so, again, the church cannot be here for that. This is also where the 4 angels hold back the 4 winds, and one with the seal of God seals 144,000. And we already were introduced to them at the start here. They will seal the 144,000. And we also see something very curious and out of time, because I've gone over this before. This is where we're seeing a great multitude from the nations, which is to say not the Jews, that came out, or the Greek actually reads, come from the Great Tribulation, which has not even begun yet. They come from. It's an expression of origination, not an expression of time. So we can't say that the Great Tribulation is over, because these people are still coming out of it, and nothing's even happened yet except these seals. And the proportions are wrong to equate them with the trumpets and bowls, because like I said, in the seals, it's 1/4 part as far as 1/4 dead and 1/4 waters polluted and all sorts of things like that. In the trumpets, it's 1/3. In the bowls, it's everything. But so God is even showing his mercy in that, doling it out bit by bit so people can still have last minute chances to change their minds. And some people do, but not many. Anyway, this is when we see that great crowd, and then there's a silence in heaven for half an hour. Okay, so I think there's something different between the seals and the rest of the judgments. And I'll show that again in the chart of mine that I made that I'll look at after this. But there's a half hour of silence, and then we see the 7 angels that will blow 7 trumpets. And before that, there is one angel that collects incense burning, collects the coals from the fire on the altar, and the incense is seen as the prayers of the saints that are being heard in heaven. And then the angel takes coals from that fire and hurls them to the earth. So things are about to get real. Before this, all these things in the sealed judgments are fairly normal until the earthquake and the dark sun and moon and stars. And that's something you can look into yourself, how that's described. I've done this in other videos, but the sun and moon go dark and the stars fall from the sky. And it describes it as being like if a strong wind comes along and shakes a fig tree and makes it cast its fruit early. And that's what John is using to describe a real thing he's seeing, not to describe an analogy. So these things are really happening. Whatever you want to say stars mean, the Bible doesn't differentiate between even stars. The only thing it says about planets is that they are stars that wander, stars that don't hold their place. That's what planet means. It means wanderer. And so as far as the Bible's concerned, every bright spot in the sky, except the sun and the moon, is called a star, aster. It's where we get astronomy and words like that. And so those asters fall to the earth at the same time the sun and moon go dark and there's a giant earthquake. But, you know, like I said, this is not the only time this will happen. So that's about the most supernatural thing. And that's why it is not until the 6th seal that these people try to hide, because we've had Cold War before, we'd have hot war before, we've had famine and pestilence before, we've had mass death before, we've had martyrdom before. So these things could be written off by people on earth, but this can't be. This is something unprecedented. And this is why even the elites hide underground in their bases. Okay, so now then let me scroll up a little bit and see what he's got going up here. He has the nice little chart of the colors of the 4 horses. We also know from Daniel, piecing things together, because we match up events described in Revelation with those described in Daniel 9 and so forth. We have 1,260 days or 42 months or 3.5 years if we're using a 30-day month, which is called a prophetic time. A prophetic years are 360 day years. And these three designations, also time, times, and half a time, as per the Daniel designation, all refer to 3.5 years. So there's no mistaking what you mean by a year when they give you the days and the months, especially the days, 1,260 days. So that's how the Bible is reckoning 3.5 years. When we have the 4 colors, I've gone into that on my websites and videos on what the colors mean and signify. And so let's go into then the trumpet judgments. Well, let me go down here and see if he has anything else under the seals. I would scroll faster, but sometimes it messes with me. Anyway, this is where he matches up the Olivet Discourse, which is Matthew 24 and Luke 13, false Christ, rumors of wars. This fits pretty well with the seal judgments. And then he's going to match them up some more with famines and earthquakes and death and the Great Tribulation, as you can see there. But let me go back up here to the trumpets. He has the seals and trumpets as all in the first 3.5 years. It's possible. I think also the seals could be a transition period between the rapture and the actual 7 years. I think that's possible too. And it also doesn't put what I see as an imbalance between the 2 sevens here and 1 7 there. But, just different ways to look at it. So now we're going to look at the 7 trumpets. And the main reason, just to stop and say why I'm doing this again, is because we're in prophetic times. And you'll hear a lot of disinfo. I'm not putting much of any stock in dreams and visions and calculations and code books. I think those have served only to make people lose hope and to make us a mockery. The Bible doesn't condone that sort of thing. It does say to study, and people will cherry pick verses that say God will do nothing without revealing to his prophets. Well, this is the revelation. That's what it's called. So if we go beyond that, we're going, I think, beyond what God said. But anyway, I'm not a cessationist, but talk about that some other day. But anyhow, we're at the 7 trumpets, and this is where we get our 1/3. Okay, we have 1/3 of the trees and grass are burned up. They call this an asteroid. Who knows? It's the burning mountain. Turns the sea to blood, 1/3 of it. An asteroid, again, they say, turns the fresh water to bitter. This is where we get wormwood. It means bitterness. There's an actual bitter herb called wormwood as well, but that's the term there is wormwood. It means bitterness. So whatever this thing is, it's going to pollute 1/3 of the waters, seawater and freshwater. Also, the sun and moon lose 1/3 of their light. Now, we also saw, remember back here in the 6 seals, that the sun, moon, and stars go dark. So how can this happen? Well, some people will say, well, it isn't in sequence, but I say, did the seals say it was a permanent darkness? No, not really. So we can't rule this out either. But the point is that we've got the seals are a 4th part, the trumpets are a 3rd part. Okay. And then there's this darkness where the sun, moon, and stars lose 1/3 of their light. And that's where we have this eagle, possibly an angel, flying out with the 3 final woes, the last 3 trumpets. So we can see how different the trumpets are from the seals. These are not natural events whatsoever. This is unprecedented, and Jesus described this time as, or at least the bowls, if nothing else, as a time that has never been this bad before and never would be again. So, and we cannot apply that to the 1st century or the fall of Jerusalem. We just can't. That's unrealistic and unbiblical, in my opinion. So then we have the first of those 3 woes is the 5th trumpet. The abyss is open. And out comes this locust army led by Apollyon. Apollyon means destroyer. The Hebrew equivalent, I think, is Abaddon. One is Greek, one is Hebrew. I forget which is which, but I think Apollyon is the Greek. And these refer by description to Satan. Okay, so he's leading his army of demons that look like locusts. That's how John is describing them. So we can't, again, allegorize an allegory. And so these are coming out of the abyss. And I of the opinion that the CERN facility is trying to open that. It isn't just any old portal they're trying to open. And of course, they have their cover story of particle colliders and whatnot, which a lot of people have said this is absolutely ridiculous. And why do they have a statue of Shiva out in front of it and do all those weird rituals to open it? But I think they're trying to open the abyss, and they will not succeed until the key is given. And that's where it's given, the fifth trumpet. The key is given by God to the angel to open up the abyss. Okay, sorry about all the phone noises. I have it charging. I can't hide it somewhere right now. I could silence it, I suppose. I might as well go ahead and do that because that's kind of annoying. So let me go put that on mute. There we go. Anyway, the abyss is open only when God says it will be open. So CERN can try whatever they want. They're not doing Mandela magic with it, by the way. I've went into that already in my other video. But this is when God says you can open the abyss, and he gives them the key. And then this happens. These things are not just released. This is the first woe for a reason, because there's 5 months of terrible suffering. People will want to die, but will be unable to for 5 months. And this is because they're being tormented by these demon locust things for 5 months. They have the sting of scorpions and so forth. But this is why it's called the first woe. And it's not even the worst one as far as heaven is concerned. And we haven't even gotten into the worst of the worst, which is the bowl judgments. So then we see at the sixth trumpet 4 fallen angels that have been held in bondage at the river Euphrates for thousands of years. And the Bible says they were held there for this very hour, day, month, and year, the specific point in history. And a third of the world population is killed. People don't repent. They don't care. They just hate God all the more. And then we see some other incidences where God is saying, you know, I'm not delaying any of this stuff anymore. We're going to kick it into high gear ourselves. And it says about Jerusalem being traveled for 42 months. And there's Old Testament descriptions of this time when Jerusalem, the earthly Jerusalem is ransacked and overrun and given over to the Gentiles. And it says 42 months. Well, that's that 3.5 years again. Now, this is only at the sixth trumpet. Well, there's 3.5 years to go, just about. This is near the midpoint. This is one of the reasons I think it's near the midpoint, why the trumpets are in the first half of the tribulation. So then we have the 2 witnesses, and people try to misinterpret these every which way they can, but what the Bible gives us. And by the way, there are 2 witnesses in Old Testament. I'll scroll down and see if he mentions that, because I haven't gone over this whole chart yet myself. But they are called the 2 olive trees that are before the throne of God. But these are going to be humans who can be killed. So they'll be in mortal bodies, and there are only 2 people in the Old Testament who went to heaven or somewhere out of earth without dying physically. That was Enoch and Elijah. Some people are of the opinion that that's the reason they come back, because they never died. Some people say it's got to be, no, it has to be, this is for Israel. It has to be Moses and Moses and Elijah instead of Enoch and Elijah. But who can say? Anyway, the point is they are human beings who will be killed. They are not institutions. They're not the Old and New Testaments. They are human beings. And they have a 1,260-day ministry, but they're killed at this point. So they have been busy for the first 3.5 years during the seal judgments and most of the trumpet judgments. Okay, that's when we'll see the 2 witnesses, and they will be in Jerusalem only. They will be killed by Apollyon after these 5 months, I think, as far as we can tell. Killed by Apollyon, but after 3.5 days, there's that 3.5 again. They're left unburied while people send gifts to each other, which is again a scenario we would not expect at the end of the tribulation, when there is no, there's no light, there's no water, probably no food by then, and people are not going to be sending themselves gifts for any reason. But here they send each other gifts because the 2 witnesses had been killed after 3.5 years by the Antichrist, the beast, but they are raised back to their feet alive again after 3.5 days and told, come up here. That's another one of those raptures. And that is all the second woe. So this torment and all those things. The first one was the torment. The second one was the releasing of these 4 fallen angels. And then the two witnesses are killed, they're resurrection and raptured, and then everybody's warned about the third woe. But first, the 7th trumpet is in heaven, where we see worship going on in heaven. The temple is open, and you see the Ark of the Covenant, which makes you say, well, this is the only thing we can say for absolute certain, that the Ark is in heaven. But we can also say, on the other hand, that the temple is in heaven as well, and there has been earthly temples at the same time. So it's possible there's also an earthly ark. I can't rule it out, but I can say for sure that the ark, an ark of some, is called the Ark of the Testimony. The ark is in heaven. So that's all I can tell you. I can just report what it says there. Excuse me. Then we have this intermission, which is in these chapters. Let me scroll up a little bit more. Between the halves of the tribulation. So we've done 3.5 years after this point, and now we get these visions. Okay. And we have 7 basic things here. We have the woman with the child. This is chapter 12 we're into. Let me scroll that back up again. Yeah, we started chapter 12, which happens to be about the middle of the book of Revelation, lengthwise, as far as chapter-wise at least. The woman with the child and the dragon about to devour the child, and I've gone over all that before. As I've said, when it comes to the constellations, yes, they can serve as signs, but signs always point to some other reality. They're not the reality themselves. And so if anybody thought something was going to happen right at that moment last September, they didn't know how to read the Bible. So anyway, she flees to the wilderness for 1,260 days. That will be the second half. So we've already seen that Jerusalem will be ransacked, and this is their warning to get out before that happens. And so the faithful Jews, a remnant who see the abomination, which is when the temple is desecrated, they will see this literally. It's a very literal. As I said, you can't allegorize an allegory or anything like that. And John describes real things that he sees. And then there's a temple planned to be built. I mean, there's a Temple Mount committee or whatever you want to call it, or movement or society that has every intention of building the temple again. And there's a good case to be made that the temple is not where the Dome of the Rock is. It's some distance away from there, not real far, but that so-called Wailing Wall is probably the wall of Herod's compound. But anyway, not going to get into all of that. But the point is that at this intermission point at chapter 12, that where the woman clothed with the sun and the 12 stars and all that goes is to the wilderness for the second half. Okay. And this is what Jesus was talking about when he said, when you see the abomination of desolation, and he mentioned Daniel, he said, run. So these faithful ones will run. And that's the point where there was war in heaven. And the devils and the angels are not strong enough. They have been granted access to heaven all this time. We saw that in Job, where the sons of God presented themselves before the throne of God and Satan with them. So we're talking about angelic beings that have had access. Even the fallen ones have had, well, some of the fallen ones have been imprisoned. We already saw that, the 4 angels at Euphrates. We know about the angels in Tartarus who monkeyed with the human genome. They were locked up, but there doesn't mean all the fallen ones were locked up. And so at least we know that Satan had been having access to God. And the New Testament says that he is the accuser of the brethren, that accuses us day and night before the throne of God. And Jesus is our advocate if we belong to him. So that's been going on, and it will stop at the midpoint of the tribulation. And Satan will be hurled to earth, and he'll be really mad because he knows his time is short. So he picks on anybody who follows Jesus. He hates them most of all, although he really hates all of mankind, even his servants, which is a great irony. But anyway, then we are just told about the beast at the midpoint. The beast from the sea, commonly called the Antichrist, but there are 2 beasts. There's a first and second beast, and the second one is called the false prophet. That's the beast out of the land. And the land in the Bible typically refers to Israel, especially Judea, the area of Jerusalem. So I'm not going to get into all the theories on that. Like I said, this is an overview, but it's this person, the beast out of the sea, that is described as 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 crowns, leopard, bear, lion. There again, we're going back to Daniel and other Old Testament references. And this is the one with the mortal wound. Now, you could say it's the whole kingdom revived, like the Roman Empire or whatnot, but there's also a person. Where there's a kingdom, there's a king. And some speculate that this is Nimrod brought back to life somehow, or some other person from the past, but who knows? Pointless to speculate. But because of rising from the dead, and this doesn't make sense for a nation, it only makes sense for a person, this person with the mortal head wound is healed and worshipped because of rising from the dead. And this will fool people who thought they had been Christians, who weren't taken in what they thought was a fake rapture, who think themselves so, the real Christians will fall for this because they'll say only God can rise from the dead. This must be really Jesus. And, they'll take his seal. Those are the ones who would be fooled. It's not the pre-trib rapturist. He will be blasphemous against Jesus and his followers and given power for 42 months over the saints. Now, Jesus had said the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. So this is not his church. These are not his saints. These are saints nonetheless, but not the church that was given that promise of protection. So we have 42 months, the second half of the tribulation, that the Antichrist will actually reign over the whole earth. Then we're given this description of the beast out of the land, the false prophet, 2 horns like a lamb, spoke like a dragon. This is a false religious figure doing miracles and sets up the abomination. So this is where we match up to Daniel. This is how we know it's the midpoint. This is how we know there was a 7-year treaty that's kicked the whole thing off, and then it was violated halfway through, because I believe if you put things together, this probably has to do with giving the Jews permission to build their temple. And in exchange for laying down their arms, this is why Gog and Magog say in Ezekiel 38:39, let's go plunder this nation that has just recovered from war, that has no bars or gates. That is to say, they let down their guard. We're going to plunder them. So I think that was part of the deal. And that at the midpoint, of course, they're betrayed. And that this religious figure is very much in on that and sets up the abomination himself. And then the first beast sits in there declaring himself God, and the second one sets up an idol to represent him, and this is in the temple. Then that's the abomination. That's desecrating the temple. And when the real Jews see that, they're supposed to run. And this is where the mark of the beast happens. Anyone who refuses to worship this false Christ is beheaded. Anyone who accepts and worships the false Christ is given that seal on their right hand or forehead. That is the mark of the beast. It is the beast's mark, not our personal ID. It is a pledge of loyalty. It is probably some kind of DNA upgrade promise. It's etched into the skin, according to the Greek terminology there. And later on, we will see, I think, a connection between that and the terrible sores that break out on people who have that mark. So then we have this fifth thing in this intermission, which is the 3 angels' proclamation. This is where we see that the gospel proclaimed throughout the air. What is the gospel? Well, we already know that Jesus rose from the dead. It is good news at the very least, and about that God is going to put an end to the powers that be, basically. Then we learn about Babylon falling and the doom of those who take the mark. That there are some today who teach that if you take the mark, you can still be saved. No, the Bible says very clearly that you are doomed if you take the mark of the beast, because you have pledged loyalty to the beast. That's what the mark of the beast is. It's a pledge of loyalty. That's why people who take it are doomed. And then we see also a harvest of sorts where an angel, or at one point it's an angel does, another point is that angel says, or one of the creatures says to Jesus, take your sickle and reap the harvest. Harvest is ripe. And that they're calling this here, this harvest of the Son of Man. And this is representing a terrible war battle on earth. This is not the Battle of Armageddon, but it is a war nonetheless outside of Jerusalem that has so much bloodshed that it rises to the height of a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia, which is like, I don't know, 150 miles or something like that square in that valley. And this is when the Great Tribulation begins. It's this intermission is a whole bunch of, some stuff looking back to when the 2 witnesses started their first 3.5 years testimony. And now it's going to start off, this is the big intermission between the fairly mild judgments before, and now when the final judgments come. So let me scroll over there, and we'll look up top here. And we have our 42 months again. We're up to chapter 15 in Revelation. And we see here the bowl judgments. They are the completion of God's wrath. And this is about the point where Handel's Messiah gets its terminology about the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. They got that straight out of Revelation. But anyway, these bowls will be the completion of God's wrath. Again, the church can't be here for that. Martyred saints are not the church, but they are taken out, as far as he says, raptured. I'm not sure where he's getting that for sure, but anyway, there's a whole bunch of things going on in heaven. And then in rapid succession, without a whole lot of description, we're told about these 7 bowls. One on the land, where this is where I was talking about painful sores on those who took the mark of the beast. I think their DNA upgrade goes bad. The body rejects it. And these people get terrible, painful sores on them, on anybody who took the mark. I'm guessing it will be on their right hand and forehead, but I'm just guessing. Then at this point, we saw 1/4 and 1/3. Now we see the sea is turned to blood and everything in it died. John doesn't say it was like blood. It says it is blood. Everything, excuse me, everything in the sea dies. Same thing happens to the rivers. Then the sun gets really nasty and burnt. You know, it had gone dark before. Again, it couldn't have been a permanent darkness because that hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen on the 5th bowl. So the sun suddenly gets very, very hot, and people are scorched, and they've already got these sores on them, and there's no water to drink. And then the kingdom of the beast is plunged into darkness. Just the beast kingdom, wherever that is. I happen to think it's in the west, but just by process of elimination, because we have described in scripture the kings of the north, east, and south, but not the west. Why? Why is that one left out? I can only, it's the only direction left for the kingdom of the beast. But anyway, that kingdom is plunged into darkness. And at that point, for whatever reason, people start gnawing their tongues in agony. And keep in mind that this is also very reminiscent of the plagues of Egypt. There was also darkness there. At that point, then the 6th bowl is poured out, and the Euphrates River is dried up, and the kings of the east come over. And some people say this is the 200 million man army of China, but no, the other people say, no, that's impossible. It is probably by description a demonic army. Why it comes from the east, not sure, but that's where it comes from. And it says 3 demonic frog spirits come out of the unholy trinity of Satan, the first beast or Antichrist, and the second beast or the false prophet. And this is what they are. Some people refer to as the unholy trinity. And these are demonic forces are described as frog spirits. Well, this is probably where we get the idea of reptilians. This is how the Bible describes them. And they are gathering the world for Armageddon. That's why that other battle with the blood up to the horse's bridle is not the battle of Armageddon. Okay, because that hasn't happened yet. They're gathering in the valley of Megiddo. That's why it's called Armageddon. But the battle never actually happens. They're just gathering there. Okay, but the river has dried up, and the kings of the east, the demonic horde, is there ready for battle. Okay, but the 7th final judgment bowl is poured out into the air. Okay. And it says at that point, there's lightning, thunder, and a terrible earthquake. If you look at the description, one like it has never been before in all of history. This is the greatest of all earthquakes. Jerusalem, the city on earth, splits into 3 parts. All the cities of all the nations collapse. That's how big of an earthquake it is. Babylon the Great is finally and forever destroyed. There are cataclysmic events on earth. 100-pound hailstones are falling. Remember that the kingdom of the beast is plunged into darkness. You can't see these things coming. You can't hide in the cities because they've been destroyed. You've got sores on you. There's nothing to drink. And now 100-pound hailstones fall from the sky. And people curse God. They had their chances. So anyway, that's the end of the judgments. And that whole thing has been the day of the Lord. Okay. So people get mixed up on their terms. But anyway, as he points out here on this green text, the book of Revelation is a blueprint of the same thing in the Olivet Discourse in Luke 13, Matthew 24. They foreshadow the layout of the entire biblical prophecy as disclosed by Jesus. Jesus said those things in the Gospels, and he gave this revelation to John. So, of course, they're going to match up. Then we have the Epiphany. That's the Greek word up there in purple, the appearance. And this is when Jesus comes to the earth with his saints, not to the sky for his saints. So it is not the rapture. It is only about Jerusalem and Israel and judging the world, the wrath of God. And so then we have this 1,000 years. This is a millennium in blue here. Let me see. Yeah, this little triangle here is of talking about people who had been beheaded. Remember, we talked about not taking the mark, got you beheaded. Well, these are the people, only these people, from the midpoint or later of the tribulation who are beheaded for refusing the mark. Those people are raised early to reign on the earth for 1,000 years only. The church will reign forever. The church, not everyone, even in tribulation times, not every saint is beheaded for refusing the mark, because a lot of people already saw in the sixth seal had been killed for other reason and by other means. So this is very specific. Only if they had been beheaded for refusing the mark did these people come to life at this point and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. And Satan is bound for 1,000 years in the abyss. He's thrown back in there. Actually, if you take that as Apollyon having come out earlier, he's thrown in there for 1,000 years so that he cannot deceive the nation, which means he's been deceiving them all this time, which again is why I reject historicism, because he's clearly been deceiving the nations all this time. Well, for 1,000 years after the tribulation, he won't be able to. Okay, so, and then at the end of that is another battle, I'm sorry, at the beginning of the tribulation, when Jesus comes back and they have already gathered for the battle of Armageddon, Jesus destroys them all and calls them to something other than the wedding supper of the Lamb. It's the macabre supper of the enemies of God who have been slain, and the birds of prey and scavenger animals will come to feast of a very nasty banquet of their own. And at that point, before the millennium begins, right after the tribulation, that is when the Antichrist and false prophet are thrown alive into the lake of fire. And then Satan is bound, the nations are not deceived, and you can see this description in Ezekiel 40 and forward of the Ezekiel's temple and the different priesthood, the priesthood of Zadok, and the different rituals and all sorts of things, and life on earth is restored and everything is hunky-dory for 1,000 years. But Jesus rules with an iron rod. And that's why there will be growing resentment among these mortals who survived the tribulation and were judged in the sheep and goat judgments as soon as Jesus got here, because he describes that in Matthew 25, that these sheep who treated the least of these properly will be still in their mortal form and will repopulate the earth for this 1,000 years. And they will have children. They will live many, many hundreds of years, and they will have children, and these children will not have known the ways before. And there will be a growing resentment over the fact that even though they're still in their mortal flesh and still can sin, even though it's kept at a minimum, they will have the seeds of rebellion because they don't like Jesus ruling with an iron hand, even if it means everybody's living in paradise, which is what happened in the Garden of Eden, and everything came for full circle. So, then we see back to number 4 here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but we have this reign for 1,000 years. There will be another resurrection after the 1,000 years. This is not the rapture. And when after the 1,000 years are done, it says, and you can read this in Revelation, the later chapters there, Satan is released, deceives the nations immediately, gathers everybody from around the world who will serve him for another Gog-Magog war, but they are destroyed with fire from heaven. And none of us have to lift a finger, and Jesus just takes care of business. And Lucifer, Satan himself, is thrown into the lake of fire where the beast and the false prophet were, and you can read about the eternal torment of at least those 3. So the concept of eternal conscious torment is not something that violates the nature of God, but it also adds in that passage that anyone who name was not found in the book of life was also thrown in there. So And no rest day or night doesn't leave any room for disagreement on whether it's eternal conscious torment, but I have a whole video on that. Then we have what's called the Great White Throne Judgment, where a book is opened, other books, the Book of Life, people are judged according to their deeds. Now, Christians have already been judged, but people outside of the church age, before and after, no, have not been judged. So this is it. This is the Great White Throne Judgment, and anyone whose, and again, name was not found in the Book of Life is thrown into the lake of fire and judged according to their deeds. What's the point of that if your deeds don't matter? Because people will say, well, if you're not Lordship salvation, or you believe in eternal security and all that, then you're preaching a license to sin. No, absolutely not. That's burning a straw man. We don't teach such a thing. The Bible doesn't teach such a thing. Paul said we died to sin. How can we live it any longer? So these people are judged according to their deeds for rewards. And the bad people, likewise, will be judged for their rewards. But instead of getting rewards, it's like a lack of punishment. If you were a good person, but you just couldn't bear the thought of bowing the knee to God, then God won't make you stay with him. So you'll go to the lake of fire because that's what you demanded. But how bad you'll suffer will depend on how you lived your life. So that's the purpose of judgment, is not to determine your salvation as in the church age. It's to determine your degree of punishment if you're going to the lake of fire, or your degree of blessing if you're going to heaven because you're outside the church age. Then death and hell, or Hades itself, are cast in the lake of fire. That's the second death. Death and Hades being destroyed means there can be no more mortality after that point. There are no more judgments. There is no more place for the dead to go. Therefore, there can be no more death. That is to say, no more mortality. So if we want to put a border or an edge piece, like I say, it's a jigsaw puzzle with corners and edges, this is an outside limit for mortality. You cannot have life and death going on forever and ever, as some people believe, when death itself is done away with and there are no more judgments. You just can't have it. That's a limit the Bible gives us that we can't go beyond. Then there's a new heaven and earth, no more sea. The new Jerusalem comes down like a bride prepared for her wedding. And that is where I said, remember about those two groups of 12, the 12 tribes, the 12 apostles. They are the foundations and gates, the pearly gates of the city of New Jerusalem, comes down from heaven, but doesn't say it actually touches the earth. But, you'd think that would be kind of important to say where it's located, because other things are given locations, but this is a new heaven, a new earth, and God will dwell with mankind. So no more death, it says. There it is, no more death, mourning, crying, or tears. It's done, it's finished, it's over with. History is over at that point. So the conclusion is Eden is restored. And the invitation is for everyone to come. And people will say, well, it's bad to wish Jesus to come because it means people won't be saved. Well, the Bible itself ends with saying, even so, come, Lord Jesus. We're supposed to ask for this. We're supposed to long for this. And Paul described a crown of righteousness for anyone who does, who long for his appearing. So how can that be evil? And keep in mind also that the more time goes on, the more people are born. And so even more souls have the potential of being lost. So it goes both ways. And they go into, a little list here about Babylon and the beast and all sorts of details that I've been over before. But like I said, this was just a overview of a very interesting, well-done chart. Like I said, I don't agree with how they portray the seal being, the way it is over. And let me go back over to that other corner. But, that seal I don't agree with. I think it's inner seals, like, you roll out a little bit, then you stop at the next seal. So let me see what they've got up here at the top about the Lamb. It says the rationale for the prophetic scroll judgments is also coming from the perspective that these divine and catastrophic judgments will happen in the natural world after the rapture. The Bible clearly states that Christ promised that his church would be spared from such type of wrath. This illustration will thus focus on three primary scroll judgments of Revelation, because like I said, he has lots of charts, so he's talking about this one, that deal with the sun, the earth, and the oceans. There will be a time when the vengeance of the Lord will be brought about by Jesus to a Christ-rejecting world. As Paul put it, that God will bring a strong delusion on those who hated the truth and did not and loved wickedness instead of righteousness. So that's what the purpose of the 70th week is. It purifies Israel until there's only a remnant of all believing Israelites left, spiritual Israel, and all that is false or defying of God is done away with. So that's what that is all about. And really great chart. So let me also try to share my chart again, which I know I've done before, but I just thought it would be a good thing to do this. And this is completely off the cuff, unplanned. I didn't, I just kind of saw that chart again. I actually had it as a screensaver. I can't think of the terms today, but a desktop picture. And I said, oh yeah, I should talk about that. So here we have, let me put this link in the chat. And I'm sorry, I have not been paying attention to the chat. I don't know if I see a few people here, but anyway, this is my overview of all Bible prophecy, both testaments, and you can go through that. I'll just let you read through it. But mainly I wanted to show that two things, the rapture and the tie-in between the Olivet Discourse and the book of Daniel and Revelation. And that's what you can see in this chart. You can see by the tiny scroll box here that this is kind of long. But when it comes to the rapture, we are the restrainer, and you can look in these passages where I'm getting this from. You're not going to look, I barely include John here, but most of everything that the mystery of the church was revealed to Paul, that's where you get the rapture. Anybody who tries to interpret it some other way is really cherry picking and taking things out of context. But it says we have the sequence of 7 things again. The Lord descends from heaven. The archangel will shout. The last trumpet of God will sound. Trumpet of God, not trumpet of the 7 angels. And I gave you references here to both testaments that are contrasted. When we have a last trumpet, it was for Israel to move out. That's what the last trumpet was. And contrast with it, Revelation 11:15, because that one is the 7th trumpet of the angel, the judgment trumpets. This is a blessing, a blessing. And it's the move out trumpet. That's why it's called last instead of 7th. And like I said, the 7 trumpets have a revelation given to John, not to Paul, at least 20 years later. So Paul is talking about an Old Testament reference here. And at that point, then the 4th thing is dead Christians will be raised. Like I mentioned, then the bodies of the living Christians transformed. We're all snatched away to meet the Lord in the air, not to come back to the earth with him. Paul doesn't mention any such thing at that point. It says we will be with him forever. And that the 7th thing is this is a message of comfort and hope. No mention of anything else that we just talked about in Revelation. So then there are some what I would call transitional battles, which I think we're seeing lining up again with things going on in Syria, which is where Damascus is, and the desire of all the immediate nations around Israel to wipe it off the map. And then the larger area, the Gog-Magog war, which will probably happen in the vacuum created after that is making perfect sense, and it's all lined up. And with the U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem is, I think, a significant thing prophetically. But what we're looking for is a sequence, not a date and a time. We don't know. And I seriously doubt the church will be here for this. But for anybody else who might listen to this later, Damascus being destroyed is an Isaiah 17, sometimes called the Oracle of Damascus. It's a prophecy of doom against Damascus. Lie in ruins, replaced by grazing flocks, which means something can live there, whatever anybody wants to think about how it's destroyed. But right now there's a million or so people still living there. There would be no people at this point, and never will be again, and only just flocks grazing there. When the glory of Israel has faded almost completely, that has not yet happened. Then people turn back to God. That will be the result of some of these things. That's why there will be a temple built. Then we have the Psalm 83, the intention of nations boarding Israel to wipe it out. And you can see the modern equivalents. And then Gog and Magog says, I'm going to go plunder that land. They have a completely different motivation. They come from farther north. And they won't succeed, though. They will be destroyed by God on the mountains of Israel. And this is a big, big sign to the Israelites to turn back to God. And that's why they do that, why they get into the temple thing, and why there will be a third of them or so left at the midpoint who will see all these things and finally, get a clue and run away. And I think they're going to run to Petra, my opinion, a lot of other people's opinion. But I make an argument here as to why I don't think the church will be here for that. And then we have the discourses, and I mentioned the Olivet Discourse. What Jesus said about what I think is more about 70 AD, he said in public, but the rest of what he said was in private to only 4 people, his inner circle of disciples. And that's where you get into Matthew 24. And what Jesus said, you can match up with the seal judgments, first of all. And he says, when you see these things begin to happen, the kingdom of God is near. Not the rapture is near, but the kingdom of God is near, not arriving, okay? All the false Christs and the wars and all those things, and Jerusalem surrounded is kind of part of the 70 AD, possibly, but it will happen again in the tribulation at the midpoint, because immediately after that, he talks about the abomination. And then this is after. Jesus says in the Olivet Discourse, after that, we will see the sign of the Son of Man come in the clouds, a trumpet blast for angels to gather who? The chosen people from the heavens. Then he says that generation will not pass before it all takes place. And I go into the debates on that. And then he says, nobody knows when this is going to happen. He likens it to Noah and Lot. I get into the taken and left issue, and that everyone should be praying for escape. The 10 virgins analogy you've heard of, in my opinion, applies only to Israel. It does not apply to the church. We are never portrayed as bridesmaids. So this is, again, he was not talking about the church there. This is that whole section, and he's in Matthew 25. That's also where you find the sheep and goat judgments. But he's talking about this first section, which I think lines up with the seals, as I've got here. Here's where I do more of the lining up with references, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Revelation for false Christ, wars, famine, plague, earthquakes, and the black sun, red moon, and stars fall, and the sky recoils. And then we get a reference to Job and lining up with Revelation. This is how we line up everything in the Bible. That's why I call it Bible prophecy integrated on this document. So you can see that what Jesus is talking about is kind of a quick preview of what he would reveal more fully to John, and will tie together other things that have been revealed to the prophets in the Old Testament. Then we have, and the reason I have slash seal and then seal judgment is because like the 6th of the seals kind of goes in with what, right into the 7th, or the first of the 7 trumpets and so forth. So it's kind of a, not a sharp line there, but this is what I can see with these references. And then we have the seal, the end of the seal judgments, beginning of the trumpet judgments, where Jesus talks about the time of trouble. And there's Daniel 9:26 and Matthew 24. We have the treaty, the beast, the persecution, false prophets, endurance for salvation, which again does not apply to the church, and the gospel of the kingdom. Then we have the great tribulation that Jesus talks about. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, and then the second half commences, and then he talks about the ruler who commits the abomination. This is again in both Testaments and the Gospels and Revelation, about describing who this world leader is and all the things he'll do, and details there. And then that's when the Judeans are told to flee to the mountains. This is not the church coming out of any institution. This is people in Judea running to the mountains when they see the temple desecrated. It's very literal. And that is the beginning of what is called in Jeremiah, the time of Jacob's trouble. And there's a battle, Jerusalem plundered, unprecedented suffering. That's what I mentioned before about the plundering is in Zechariah 14. And false prophets, and then people gather in Megiddo. Remember I mentioned that? Battle of Armageddon. No battle actually happens. We can see that in Joel and Revelation. And then a lot of things happen after the tribulation, which is, again, why people get mixed up by events, because they happen more than once. We have the sun and moon again. They've been darkening and relighting several times in tribulation. But then Jesus talks about when he returns, and that's when he'll talk about the sheep and goat judgments. You can see down here on the last point here, Matthew 7, Mark 25, and Luke 13. I said Matthew 25 before. Sorry about that. Or it was Mark 25. And that's where the taken and left, different context. So you have to be careful of that. Then we have the millennium described, after the millennium, the things that happen, and then some footnotes here on the unique identities and destinies of Israel's in the church. That's extremely important, or you won't get this right. A close look at Daniel, and then some notes about the day of the Lord, what that means. And then we also have some fads and things about the two witnesses, the mark of the beast, Babylon. Sorry, I'm running through this so fast, but A Tale of Three Cities is something that I have as titled in my prophecy book. You can see the link there to that book. And people don't know about these cities and why there's three different cities. They're not describing the same one, and it talks about the priesthood of Zadok that I mentioned. So those are the two main references I wanted to go over. And like I said, it's completely off the cuff. I did not plan this in advance, but it just seemed like I need to keep saying this because we are living in prophetic times. Nobody knows when this kicks off. As long as the church is here, it's not kicking off. And I don't know how long the church will be here. We all can't wait for the church to be gone. Good and bad people alike want us out of here. Nobody more than we do. But while we're here, we don't just sit on our hands or sit on a hilltop and wait. We're doing things. And when the more busy we get doing our things, the quicker we can get out of here. So let me take a look at the chat. And let's see who we got here. Mark, all people, free people. Lab Kung Fu. Hippie, McVice. Joe Allen. Mark Humdrum Yokel. Don't think I've seen your name before. Salted Cedar. I know that name. Vic, of course. And John Loves Jesus. So let me see what you're saying. I was just looking at names there. Yeah, that's when you mentioned about Fibonacci sequences. I did look at the chat then because I was like, help me out, I can't remember the name. Let's see. First world government. We are not told in the book of Daniel for how long. Then division into 10 kingdoms and only 7 years of tribulation. Well, Daniel 9 is where we get the 70 weeks prophecy, and they go all the way to the end of history, and especially the latter chapters of Daniel give us more detail. But we do know that 69 of those weeks had passed by the time Jesus came and was crucified, because as Daniel's prophecy predicted, he would be cut off. But what we never were told is the gap between the 69th and 70th week. But when it starts, we know how long it will be. So as far as the 10 kingdoms and all that, I'm, again, speculating, but I think that the rapture will be the cue for the New World Order to kick off in high gear. And with all the turmoil and upheaval, especially of the first 4 seals, I would think there could easily be a quick arising of 10 kingdoms. There could also be a gap of time during the seal judgments of possibly 3.5 years, as I show in my, well, let me just go get that on Revelation. Let's go to here on the commentary and Revelation. And go down to the end. A whole bunch of material in there if you're interested, but I have, whoops, I went past it. I thought that's where I had my chart. I didn't draw it out in there. That's right. I just wrote it down. Sorry about that. I had a chart somewhere. Let's see where that is. Let me try another reference here real quick. Let's see. Nope, it's not resources, it's features. I think it's this one. That's where I put my pictures. Yeah, there it is. There's my little chart. A speculation, I don't know, but we have another 7 years in Ezekiel 39 where it talks about the first Magog battle, and that after the battle, the people of Judea burn the weapons of the enemy for 7 years. My speculation in this chart is that the 7 years they'll burn it has to end when they flee, because they're going to be ransacked and overrun after that point. So if they're going to burn weapons for 7 years after Gog and Magog, then we could tack another 3.5 years between the rapture and the actual beginning of the trumpet judgments. And that the 2 witnesses would start at the beginning of the 7th seal, when that half hour starts, that they are cut off at the 6th trumpet. I'm just trying to piece this together chronologically. So let me give you a link to that chart. It's, as I said, it's kind of at the bottom of that page. But that's just more speculation of how things fit together, because there's a lot of details to look at. But as far as your question there, Humdrum, on the timing of things, we do know that we got 7 years left. When that 7 years starts, we don't know. But I'm thinking during that time is when we'll have the 10 kingdoms. I don't know for sure. Let's see. Better late than never. Yep. Let's see. Second grader in college. I don't know. I mean, nobody, like I said, nobody really has a handle on this. So stay away from people who think they've got it locked down, or especially there are people who think they're the two witnesses. That's just so much arrogance. I can't describe it. But the two witnesses, as we saw, are human beings who will be in Judea for 3.5 years and then will be killed. So don't accept any pretenders. Those are just some more of the false prophets Jesus warned about, is my opinion. Like I said, incredible arrogance, if not mental illness, to claim one is one of the two witnesses at this point. So let's see what else in the chat. Oh, thank you. That's a very nice compliment there. Well, I wish this thing wouldn't jump on me when I'm trying to scroll down slowly. Yep, I'm hoping to. Oh, there's 444. I don't think I read your name. You might have just gotten here while I was scrolling back in the chat. Doesn't the tribulation start at, he signs a covenant with man for 1? Yes, exactly. The thing is, it does not have to start at the rapture. The rapture is not a part of Daniel's prophecy. It's not in there. It's not seen. It's the mystery. So it's when that 7-year treaty is signed, which the word there indicates an enforcement. So it could be something existing that is finally enacted. Who knows? I don't get hung up too hard on the terminology for that, but there will be some kind of 7-year agreement that has to do, in my opinion, all things considered, with building the temple in Jerusalem. And that because of that, concessions are made and Israel lays down its arms and so forth. And that's why Gog decides to plunder the place, because they just recovered from war and they've let down their guard. They've got no bars and gates on their walls, no walls. So yeah, that's when the 7 years kicks off. At that point, when the agreement is signed with Israel and many. And yes, I know it is Israel. Some people say not, but it is by Daniel 9. It says it's very specific prophecy about your people, your holy city, your sanctuary. Very specific. So it's not with just anybody. It's a treaty with Jerusalem. The Jewish people as centered in Jerusalem. That's why Jerusalem has to be their capital, and that's happening. So, yeah, I know who those two people are, and so do you, who think they're the two witnesses. This is beyond ludicrous. It is beyond arrogant. I don't know how anyone can make that claim with a straight face and say that they know the Bible and that everybody else is wrong. I mean, the words on the page haven't changed. There is no Mandela changing the words, and they're not it. They are lying. If they're deluded, then either way, I don't care if they're lying or crazy, they should not be listened to, those two people, and you know who they are. Anyway, yeah, try and find any other people who say they're the two witnesses. You'd be looking for a long time. So anyway, I think that's all I have for today. I don't even know how long I've been going, but I'm going to get a drink because I'm thirsty. And again, I'm always happy anybody shows up. If you want to spread it around, if you think other people could benefit from that, go ahead. And as I said, I don't claim to have the answers, and I'm leery of anybody who does. I'm just saying what I see in the scriptures, and that's all I'm tasked with doing. So I see we've got our resident downvote already. Almost every video of mine has one downvote. So I've got a Klingon someplace or secret admirer who gets a kick out of downvoting me, but whatever. It's a view. I don't care. Downvotes mean absolutely nothing, but that there are people who hate you irrationally. And we've all done that, downvote somebody just because that's all we can do. We're frustrated, but whatever. I don't care. It's not going to stop me from doing anything. So anyway, that's all I have. I don't know if it helped, but I will add this to the prophecy. I think I have a prophecy playlist. Whenever I click to add somebody to a playlist, some video to a playlist, it'll just put it at the end. It's a kind of a pain to rearrange them, but I think I'll just leave it as is. So there you are. And catch y'all later. Thanks for coming.